Welcome to the Hastings Shadmary Show with your hosts, Andee Hastings and Mally Shadmary. Dive into the heart of family law as Andee and Mally bring clarity to legal challenges, celebrate client victories, and share the wisdom of their combined expertise. Get ready for a journey into empowerment and advocacy right here where your story matters.
Welcome to the Hastings Shadmary Show, where we delve into the heart of family law and the stories that shape our lives. I'm Andee Hastings. Joining me today is the lovely and brilliant Kendall Walker. She has joined Hastings Shadmary. We're so lucky to have her, not only here at the firm, but here on the show today. How are you doing, Kendall?
I'm doing great. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm excited for you to be here, too. So, Kendall, yesterday? First, I want to ask you, Mally and I ask each other this all the time. Are you feeling like a warrior or a diplomat today?
Ooh, I definitely think a warrior.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just started here, last Monday.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of just getting acclimated, getting used to things, and, taking every day, one day at a time, and fighting that fight and getting everything situated and getting in here and getting ready to roll.
And just so that y'all know, Kendall is one of our client care specialists, and so it's near and dear to her heart to take care of our amazing clients that we're lucky enough to have here at Hastings Shadmary. Just to make sure people understand why you're feeling like a warrior. We've got a lot of people who need us right now.
Absolutely.
So, what do you want to talk about today, Kendall?
Well, I actually want to talk about yesterday, Andee. So you were on the show with the lead attorney, and that's Jay Campbell. And so what are your key takeaways from, talking with him and discussing the divorce case between Nathan Wade and Joselyn Wade?
So a couple things. First, the lead attorney is a former family law attorney. I think before he retired, we had a case together. He was lovely. And he invited us. He's been doing, he has his own YouTube channel. It's at The Lead Attorney. And he has been covering the case involving Nathan Wade in Fulton County. And he's also been covering our divorce case. We haven't talked about it on the show, but it's definitely known. So I'm not revealing any confidences when I say that there is a divorce case pending between Nathan Wade, who until recently was a special prosecutor in Fulton County with Fonnie Willis, and we represent Joyce Wade, the wife. And so the case has taken some twists and turns, and it's become the focus of some media attention. And the lead attorney invited us on the show to talk about some motions that were just filed. We just filed a motion, and Nathan Wade also just filed a motion. And so we were walking through not only what's behind those motions, but also a little bit of background on what's been going on in the case. It's hard for people to know everything because all you see is, the bits and pieces that are out there. And so we tried to provide some clarity for his viewers. And by the way, I want y'all to know that since being on that show yesterday, we've received over 200 new subscribers to our channel. Thank you, everyone. Wow. We are so grateful. We just, we're here to talk about things that we hope are meaningful to our viewers, and just the fact that you're taking your time and spending it with us, it's really meaningful to us, and we're grateful for that.
Very much so. Yeah. You did fantastic yesterday. It was a wonderful show. It really was.
It was fun. He's lovely. His co-host AV is lovely. Their watchers were funny and insightful. They had great questions. I mean, really good legal questions.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
It's really impressive.
Yeah. Well, we are very much impressed, and you're doing a great job on this case.
Thank you.
Obviously.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're wonderful.
Well, I appreciate that so much.
Yes. So, any other takeaways? Anything else that you
well,
want to add?
I think that, there's so much. It's hard because, like I said a minute ago, people only see one small piece of a puzzle that they're interested in. And it's not normal that a divorce case is in the spotlight, that there is media coverage and those sorts of things. And this case has been pending since 2021. And, Nathan Wade filed it against Joyce the day after he was appointed as the special prosecutor in Fulton County. And there have been a lot of difficulties with that. I know. Well, I only discovered that back in December when I finally, a little before December of last year, when I received some documents from Fulton County. And that's when I saw, wait a second, he was appointed on this day, and the very next day he filed for divorce. And he's made a substantial amount of money. This is all in the public record. I'm not going to reveal anything that's not in the public record at this point. But he's made a substantial amount of money. We've had to chase the money. He has not wanted to provide documents and discovery throughout the case. We've jumped through hoops of fire to get him to comply with the most basic discovery requirements. And it's one of the reasons the case has been pending for so long. And so as we've gathered those documents, there's this other crew of people associated with this Fulton County case who I believe have been looking for information and looking at what he's doing before we even knew that he was a special prosecutor in Fulton County. So, it's been a whirlwind. Our client, Joyce, is one of the most lovely humans you could possibly meet. Nathan has tried to drag her through the mud in this case. And he's had a voice because he's testified in Fulton County, not yet in our divorce case. And so he's putting out his own narrative. And one of the things that I think was really helpful about yesterday was just kind of clearing the air a little bit about that. Right. He's trying to paint Joyce as this adulterer who caused the separation of the parties. And that's just simply not the case. Yeah. And, I could talk about all the reasons why it's not the case, but that's not all in the public record yet. So I'm going to stay away from that for the moment, but trust and believe that we can prove that that's not the case. It's we just filed a motion for contempt because Nathan Wade, who is an attorney and a judge, has been a judge, can't follow the court's order. This would be our second contempt in this case. He's already been held in contempt for refusing to provide documents. And our client, it desperately needs medical care that he is court-ordered to pay for up front. And he agreed to that. And he agreed to that 2 months ago. And he's already refusing to abide by the agreement. And so here we are.
Oh, you think you know better.
Well, I do. It's like, I do think that generally when you're dealing with court cases, lawyers are held to a higher standard. And I don't actually have a problem with that. I mean, we know better and we should know better.
Right.
And so it feels really egregious to have an attorney, just flagrantly ignoring an order, particularly an order that they agreed to. He agreed to do this, and now he just doesn't want to do it. So we're dealing with that.
Wow. It's a lot.
It is a lot. It's been really hard on our client. She's been battling some illness, and that makes the need for the medical care even more. And so we're trying to balance going after him in the way that we need to with being careful with how she feels and how all of this is affecting her. I think that being in the public spotlight, particularly, everyone has an opinion and everyone's entitled to their opinion. But, she's had a sort of a negative perception that I think Nathan has been trying to drum up. And I also think that has taken a toll on her. Understandably, she's not a lawyer. She's not in that case in Fulton County. She didn't ask for any of this. And she didn't even know that he was a special prosecutor when we filed this case. We didn't know. We didn't find out for almost 2 years because he wouldn't provide documents in our case. and he wasn't revealing it in the responses that he was giving us. So it's just, it's trying to find that balance between being a warrior and also just protecting our client emotionally from everything that's going on around her.
How would you say she's doing kind of personally, emotionally?
She has her good days and her bad days, I would say. Like anybody, I think going through a situation like this, I think that she's handling it incredibly well considering what's going on, because most people don't deal with their divorce case in the media. And so that adds on a layer that it's hard to really wrap our minds around. But anybody who's gone through a divorce, anybody who's dealt with this, knows how difficult it is. Even if you agree with your spouse that you want a divorce, even if you're on the same page, for the most part, it's still difficult emotionally. So if you add on that you're not on the same page, or there's any kind of nastiness by one party against the other, that's difficult. And then when you take all of that and you put it in the public eye, it's something incomprehensible. So I think under the circumstances, she's doing incredibly well.
Good.
Yeah.
Good to hear. Yeah. Well, she's doing well now that she has you to get her through this. So
she's like family. She means so much to us.
Oh.
She really does.
Yeah.
And she knows it. But in case you forgot, I'm telling you right now, Joyce, you are family.
Aw. So in my role, I get a lot of kind of frequently asked questions, if you will. Yes. And so I'm sure people would appreciate me maybe touching on a few of those, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Okay. So people who are in similar situations, that, are not in the public eye, of course, but, similar situations. So first one, can my lawyer represent me and the opposing party? Is that a possibility?
So that's a great question. We get variations of that question all the time, which I'm sure that means you do too.
Yes.
Since they ask me the same thing. A lawyer cannot ethically represent both parties in a divorce action, no matter how uncontested it is or is anticipated to be, because we are barred ethically from representing both sides of an action. When we're hired, I tell people all the time, I am team you. And that doesn't mean I have to go out and destroy the other side, but it does mean that I can't give them advice. They can't rely on any advice that I give them because it's a conflict. We now have a conflict of interest, and it would not be appropriate for me to represent both sides of a case. The only time I am involved in both sides of a case are involved with me is when I'm a neutral, which is as a mediator. I can mediate for two parties. I act as a neutral and I help them come up with resolutions, but it is absolutely unethical for an attorney to represent both sides of a case. And it concerns me because occasionally I'll have people come in and they'll say, well, my spouse went to this lawyer and they told him or her that they could represent both of us. And I don't know sometimes if that's just them misunderstanding what was said. But I know that there are a handful of lawyers out there who do that and they're not supposed to. So just know that at the end of the day, your spouse's lawyer does not have your best interest at heart, and you need your own counsel, practically, but also ethically.
See, and I know that some people, I've definitely heard in the past, well, if you can't represent us both, my spouse thinks that if we, involve an attorney, that it's going to be, just a war starting out. And so,
right.
And that's not necessarily the case at all.
No, it isn't. And I think that's a really good question too. And it's a concern that people have. And sometimes it's because the other side wants to convince the person who doesn't yet have an attorney just not to get one. They may not have any malicious intent, but they may, again, y'all are on opposite sides of this process. And don't let anyone scare you into not having an attorney. I would say that those are the situations where you probably most need to have an attorney, because, there is a lot that happens in these legal documents that's going to bind you to things for years to come. It's going to affect the rest of your life. And you are familiar with the details of your life. You are not and should not be familiar with how the law applies to those details. You need someone who can guide you. And if your spouse is telling you that you should not get one, you need to get one. Because, and also, I say this a lot, people are not always in equal bargaining positions. It's unusual that both people have the same amount of knowledge about your finances, the same access to information, the same resources, all of those things. There's almost always an imbalance. And so if you don't have a sort of an equal bargaining position, you really do need someone who can come in there and cut through any emotion, because even in the most sort of uncontested cases, there's still emotion.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're going through a divorce. That's an emotional experience. It's a life change.
Mm-hmm.
So, and hiring a lawyer does not have to send the case off the rails. I do ask people if their spouse has an attorney
Mm-hmm.
in my consultations, who it is sometimes, because, I've been doing this for 27 years. I know how different lawyers are and how they conduct themselves in cases, and whether or not they're going to come in, both barrels, blazing, or if they're going to really try to work things out. And my view is, if your client wants to come in and try to resolve it as amicably as possible from the get-go, if I see red flags that I think may be a problem with that, I will tell my client, but I will tell them, we will go in there and if it goes off the rails, it's not because it's going to be because of something we do.
Mm-hmm.
But we absolutely have to be prepared to jump in the ring if they force it that way.
Right.
So, but some lawyers just start out in the ring.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really that's more about vetting your lawyer and making sure that they have a similar approach to you.
That's a great segue into my next question, actually, because this is kind of speaking towards kind of how to maximize your relationship with your attorney, or, once you hire them, the best way to kind of go about things. And,
Right.
I get a lot of questions on, how I should communicate with my attorney. So would you suggest, picking up the phone every time, you want to speak with them, or email?
So, I think every client is different and every lawyer is different. I'm not trying to have a lawer's response like, well, it depends.
Yeah.
But it kind of does.
Yeah.
So, I want people to communicate with me in the way that they find most effective. I think that sometimes, because we do have multiple cases, and sometimes we're in court, or we're in mediation, or we're in Zoom court even, and, all those things. So we can't always just answer the phone when somebody calls in unless we've set a call. Mm-hmm. But when you send an email, then we can get to it more quickly sometimes. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, sometimes some conversations just don't lend themselves to an email. So for us, I just like to do what is best depending on the issue. Some clients I have do not operate on email. They have jobs that they're like, I have a client that's a nurse. She's not on email all day. And so she needs a message that on her phone, then she knows to call me back or check her email or whatever. And so you really have to just kind of tailor it to what the client needs are. Now, I know lawyers who refuse to speak to clients on the phone. And that's their thing, and it works for them. And I guess it works for their clients because they're very upfront about it. Mm-hmm. That is not us.
No.
And I think you need to meet people where they are. And sometimes, and this, like sometimes somebody sends an email. Somebody will send me an email and they're like, I just have a quick question. Mm-hmm. And I read it and I'm like, not a quick answer, so I'm going to call you. So it just depends on what they need. Mm-hmm. So I think you just have to adapt to that.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's important when you're vetting them as well, to kind of see if they kind of drive home communication, because it is extremely important.
Well, it is. And from what I understand, one of the biggest complaints that clients have about lawyers is their responsiveness or lack thereof.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that. I was taught that when I was in law school.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's like you're bringing your A game just by being responsive, which is not how it should be.
Right.
But I understand that because emotionally this is an anxiety-inducing situation.
Mm-hmm.
And the last thing you want to feel like is that you've reached out to your lawyer and it's just gone into a black hole and you can't get an answer to a question because that creates its own anxiety. So maybe the question wasn't life and death, but then just not knowing starts to feel very difficult. So
Absolutely.
I do think that that's an important question to ask your potential attorney as you're vetting people to decide who is the right fit for you to handle your divorce.
Mm-hmm. And I also think it's important to kind of be to have maybe a firm that's in an office all the time, Right. Yeah. It's because, I from my understanding, there are a lot that are remote and, that can be pretty challenging with communication as well.
That's interesting. And you probably know better about that in your role when you talk to people coming in, because there are a lot of attorneys since COVID who do continue to practice remotely, and there's something about having your lawyers in the office. And no shade on attorneys that practice remotely. I know lawyers that practice remotely and who are incredibly successful and are very responsive to their clients. But I do think that, like we're all here in the office. And so you can get a hold of more than one person and you can somebody can track somebody down for you. It's just more collaborative, interactive. Right. And I think that leads to better communication all the way around.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Okay, so this is kind of going on a different topic, but I get this a lot. Is there a benefit to filing your case first?
I get this question a lot too. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're the plaintiff or the defendant, if you file first or you file second. However, and I tell people this all the time, if I'm drawing my perfect picture of how to approach your case, I want to file first for you. And here's why. There is a tactical advantage to being the first to file. If you ever have any hearings, any trials, the person who filed the case first is the plaintiff. So they present evidence first and they present evidence last. They argue, they speak first, and they get to speak last. So you get the first word and the last word. And so that is a power position. There are, in certain cases, depending on the facts, there are benefits to being the respondent. So it's not the end of the world if your spouse files, and we know exactly how to deal with it. But if I'm drawing a picture of exactly how I want it to be, I'd rather be the one to file first. I like to control the narrative for my clients, even if it's a case that doesn't look like it's going to be disputed, because I say this all the time. I know I'm a broken record. You hope for the best, but you plan for the worst. And you won't have that power position if you didn't preserve it from the beginning.
Right.
So we can do both. We obviously do both. And there can be benefits to being the respondent, but I like to be the plaintiff. I like for my clients to be the plaintiff.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Have more control over the timeline.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So is Georgia an at-fault state, would you say? Would you say? Well, is it or is it not?
Yes or no, Andee? It is. There are fault grounds to obtain a divorce in Georgia, but there's also a no-fault grounds. You can obtain a divorce in Georgia on the grounds that the marriage is irretrievably broken, which is just another word for what we've heard people refer to as irreconcilable differences. That's no fault. And so even in cases where there is fault, where there is adultery or abandonment or something like that, we may not plead it in the initial pleading. We might just go on the no fault grounds. It doesn't mean we're prevented from presenting the evidence. All that means is that in order to obtain the divorce, we don't have to prove every element of adultery to get you divorced. We don't have to prove anything other than your marriage is irretrievably broken. So, but yes, there is a no-fault grounds in Georgia.
Good to know. Okay, so get this one a lot as well. So, common law marriage. So what is this, and does it still exist?
Right. It does not exist any longer in the state of Georgia.
Really?
And it has not existed since July of 1997. And I know this, well, I mean, I'm a lawyer. Hopefully I would know this. But also when I was a domestic violence prosecutor, I started my practice in 1997. And it was right at that time that the law changed. And so I had a lot of people then who were common law married. And what that means is that you've lived together and held yourself out as a married couple, but you've not gone through the process of actually getting married. But to the world, you're a married couple. You live together. You do all the things that a married couple would do. And so previously, you could have a common law marriage and you could get, benefits if you had to go through a divorce. You cannot do that any longer unless you actually get married. There is no common law marriage. So people a lot of times will get people who come in and they'll say, maybe they have kids together, but they never married, and they'll want to divide assets, which is understandable. I've been with this person for 18 years. We have 2 kids together. We never married. How do I? And that becomes tricky because there is no common law marriage. And so you have to deal with each one of the legal issues in a case like that specifically and separately. Whereas in a divorce, you deal with it all at one time. So that's a really good question.
Yeah. And you kind of, you're kind of touching on this earlier, but I get a lot of, separation as, versus divorce questions.
Yes.
So separate maintenance versus divorce.
Right.
So what are the differences?
Such a good question. So appreciate you. Sure. Going in.
Well, I hear these from others.
Right. Well, and it's important because I mean I've heard this question probably 3 times in the last week and a half.
Yeah.
So, separate maintenance is just a legal separation where you file an action. It looks remarkably similar to a divorce action. You allege the same sort of issues, the need for support, the need for child support, addressing how to deal with assets and that sort of thing. But at the conclusion, you're not actually divorced. You are legally separated, and you have a court order that indicates exactly how you're supposed to conduct yourself. Usually, I think the people that file for legal separation these days are people who they may have hit a rough patch and they really do want to separate, but they think that there's a reasonable possibility of reconciling. And so they want to go through the process and have guardrails, but also preserve their ability to reconcile. Sometimes people do it because they have a moral or religious issue with divorce, which I understand and support. I mean, I support whatever my clients need. That's what I support. One thing to know about a separate maintenance action, which is a legal separation, is that let's say we file a legal separation on behalf of our client and the other side says, we go through it for a little while. We come up with a temporary order. We decide, who's going to do this and who's going to do that. The other side then is like, you know what? I just want to get a divorce. And they can go file a divorce. And what happens when that happens is the legal separation is abated by the divorce. And what that means is it's basically absorbed, essentially, in the divorce, like it never happened. So that can be kind of a costly experience because in some ways you're starting over in a new action. And so that's why I say it's really usually the separate maintenance is really only usually effective for people who really do want to make a good faith effort at reconciling, or they just intend to live apart for the rest of their lives, but just don't want a divorce. And there can be reasons for that.
Also the benefits standpoint.
Right.
Yeah.
So, like, for instance, let's say one spouse has a serious medical issue and couldn't otherwise get medical insurance. I've seen people stay together. Technically, they're not divorced, but they go through a legal separation so they can live their separate lives, but so that they can remain on each other's health insurance. And in this day and age, especially with how challenging it is obtaining health insurance and how expensive, that is a huge issue. And if you have a pre-existing condition or that sort of thing, it's really important to have that continuity. Of course, it requires both people to be on the same page, but that is a huge benefit to a legal separation.
And like you said earlier, you were saying something, usually something, happened in the marriage, but they still think that there's a chance of reconciliation. Would maybe a postnuptial agreement come in handy with that?
Look at you coming in hot. Yes, and I highly recommend those. And you can, as part of a legal separation, you can enter into effectively what is a postnuptial agreement, and all that is. We've talked about it before, is an agreement. It's much like a prenuptial agreement where you enter into terms that will guide you in the event of a divorce. The only thing you can't address is custody and child support, but that'll provide you guardrails in the event that you do end up in a divorce situation. And so, that's also an option for people, even as opposed to going through a legal separation, if they want to try to work through things, but they want to address the issues and have some guardrails as well. So if you don't want to get into the process, but you do want the protections, you can do that. Just be sure that you have an attorney who has a lot of experience and understanding of postnuptial agreements. They're tricky. There's a lot of law and conflict surrounding them, and so there are very specific things boxes you need to check of things that need to be included in them, and things that shouldn't be if you want them to be enforced. So that's my one little word of warning on that. But it's a really great question, and we have that happen occasionally.
It kind of got me thinking about annulment as well versus divorce. I know that there are grounds for an annulment. How would you handle, let's say, somebody, let's talk about the grounds first of an annulment, if we can, just kind of to touch on that, and then kind of what to do in a certain situation. So in order to get an annulment, because I do get a lot of questions on that, because, if you can get it annulled, why not?
Right.
But, there are specific grounds that we got to stay on. And so, a few of those there's quite a few of them. And I could probably rattle them off to you, but, I don't know if you wanted to touch on.
To know what you think about this.
Yeah.
Tell me.
So there are quite the grounds are, somebody is, was married before, are married still at the time that you got married. And that's, of course, bigamy. Not going to work. So that would be grounds for an annulment.
Correct.
You married somebody underage. Be grounds for an annulment.
Yeah. She has not been to law school. I want y'all to know for the record. But this is an example of the people that we're lucky enough to have dealing with our potential clients when they call into this office. Kendall cannot give legal advice, and she would not give legal advice, but she is extremely knowledgeable.
Yeah.
So much information.
Well, I've talked to a lot of people, so these are just, common things that I hear all the time, and, something that I've definitely looked into because, I want to be able to answer.
You want to know what you're talking
about.
And
exactly.
Understand how, is it a situation that we can actually help them in?
Exactly. Exactly.
And it's funny that you mentioned the bigamy issue. That we have a case right now involving that.
Yes.
So yes, that is a situation that is a grounds for annulment, and that I have probably seen more than any other situation, more than marrying somebody underage,
right?
And that sort of thing. And sometimes it's like a just a legal snafu that the prior marriage wasn't properly ended and they were not properly divorced. It doesn't have to be something nefarious like somebody is running around the country just marrying a bunch of people. So although that is interesting and I'm sure it would make a great Dateline NBC episode. Oh, wait.
There's you too.
I feel like I've seen that episode. A couple times.
My goodness. Yeah. So, there are very strict grounds.
Right.
So if, how do we handle that here if we were to, we file for the annulment, sometimes it gets pushed through, other times it does not. So would you file for a divorce and annulment at the same time when you're...
Honestly, it depends on the facts of the case.
Got it.
Okay. That answer, it depends.
Yes.
It really depends on the facts of the case. But, and we've had people come in wanting an annulment for specific religious reasons as well. And so that's its own, can of worms or whatever. But if there are children and that sort of thing, that's not a situation where it would be appropriate. But typically we would just file for the annulment. And then if there's an issue, it's strange. It's somewhat disfavored in the law because it's basically saying that this marriage never existed, and public policy cuts against that. So there are situations where it seems like it should be annulled, but the court does not annul the marriage. And so then we do a divorce, and it's usually fairly straightforward because we've already gone through the process of why an annulment would be appropriate. But typically we file the annulment first.
Okay. Yeah. Makes sense. Goodness, there's so many questions I get all the time, but so, kind of, well, I think we kind of touched on this one, but when you're going through a divorce and you can't stand maybe your spouse, obviously that would probably be why you're going through the divorce, but you have to live together during the divorce. How do we handle things? How do we handle that? If there's hostility, if there's all kinds of things surfacing.
It can be really challenging because, you have gone through your marriage accustomed to being able to maintain your expenses and obligations using both of your incomes. And it's not always an option for people to somebody just moves out and they start paying for a new place, or they move out and the person staying in their home pays for both places, and it's just not always an option. And so sometimes we do have to cohabitate while the case is pending, and it can be really tricky. It's sometimes it's like a powder keg, and the things that frustrate you about somebody don't go away just because that you're embarking upon the journey to end that. So, we have to be really careful. There are situations where two people just simply cannot live under the same roof. And if they don't have the financial means, somebody may have to go live with family members or get really creative on how to deal with it because, we have to worry about domestic violence. And, there are different situations involving domestic violence. And sometimes in these situations, tensions are so high that even people that have never had a history of domestic violence, it can happen. And so those are the types of cases that we look at and guide our clients to do whatever is going to benefit them in their safety. But if they're living under the same roof and, typically they'll stay in separate bedrooms if that's a possibility. If they have kids, that's another challenge because you cannot talk about the divorce case with or in front of your children. And little people have big ears and they hear everything. So just because you think they don't know, they know everything. And you should, quite frankly, conduct yourself like they can hear every word that you're saying as though they're standing right next to you. So that's a big challenge I've seen for people, or just not getting along with each other and venting their frustrations towards that person in the presence of their children. It all impacts them. So, if you're going to do it, and we do have cases where that happens, you have to be really careful. It takes an extra level of emotional control. You have to control yourself towards your spouse, and as well as control yourself in front of your kids. And that can be hard
Mm-hmm.
when you're already going through the emotional turmoil of a divorce.
Right.
So, it can be done. We can come up with an arrangement of how people will pay for bills under the same roof and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
We usually start with figuring out what was the status quo beforehand, who was paying for what, and try to continue something in that vein.
Mm-hmm.
We do try to put up guardrails, but fundamentally, emotionally, the people have to be in the right place for that.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Good advice. You mentioned kids, so I will touch on the question that I get all of the time, which is, how is child support calculated? Love to get that question.
So in Georgia, we have an Excel workbook called the Child Support Worksheet, which is many worksheets.
Mm-hmm.
And you plug in the information and the numbers, and it gives you the basic child support obligation. And in Georgia, the paradigm that is built on it's called pro rata shares. So what you do is you put each person's income. If one person is not working for whatever reason, they will likely have an amount of income imputed to them, like what they could earn if they went out today and had a job. And you put those two in, and there are other things that you can add into, but just starting there, it generates what the legislature has determined is the amount necessary to support the number of children that you have based on the total amount of income in your household. And then what it does is it takes it and divides that amount by the percentages of each of your incomes of the total income. So let's just say one person makes $100,000 and one person makes $200,000. That's kind of a weird. That's an extreme example, but it's easy numbers, so that's why I picked it. So basically, you've got a 67% split. The person who makes $200,000 has 67% of the overall household income. So whatever child support number the legislature has determined must be paid based on that combined support will be divided with 67% to the person with 67% of the income, 33% to the person with 33% of the income. And depending on who's the primary custodian, typically the non-custodial parent will pay the amount to the custodial parent. Mm-hmm. There are variations on that. It's obviously, there are layers of complication. There are things that you can put into the child support worksheet, but that at a 30,000-foot view is kind of where we start with child support.
Got it.
You add in things like who pays for the children's medical insurance, and that affects the overall amount and that sort of thing. And then there are other things that are discretionary that we can include, and we can do an entire segment on child support. We probably should.
Yes.
But we will. And maybe that'll help with some of the questions.
Yeah.
That's what we're here for.
Uh-huh.
But that's it, kind of big picture, fundamentally, how our child support calculator is constructed.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, Kendall, I want to thank you for being a part of this. I know that this is not what you normally do. I'm
Kendall, so happy to do it.
Come on. And Kendall has such good questions, and we really want to help our viewers understand the process. And so to the extent that you really brought that, I'm grateful. So I hope that you'll be willing to join us again.
I definitely will. I'm grateful to be here. So I really appreciate you having me on today.
Absolutely.
And I had a lot of fun.
Well, everyone, thank you so much. And thank you for joining us. You can find us. Our website is www.hsfamilylaw.com. And tune in next time. We look forward to seeing you.